Good morning and welcome to World Water Day 2025. Coinciding with the United Nations International Year of Glaciers Preservation, the theme for this year's conference is Save Our Glaciers. My name is Taylor Virgin, and as one of the conference vice chairs of the Society of Water Institute graduate students, I'm excited to co-host this morning's keynote. We will begin this morning with a territorial acknowledgement. On behalf of the University of Waterloo, I would like to acknowledge that much of our work takes place on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. The main campus where we are sitting today is located on the Haldeman Tract, the land granted to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on either side of the Grand River. Only around 5% of the land granted under the Haldeman Treaty remains under Six Nations control today. And despite the Grand River being one of the drinking water sources for people living within this watershed, only 30% of residents on the Six Nations Reserve had access to piped water within their homes as recently as 2024. The University of Waterloo also acknowledges that much of their water research occurs on lands across Canada which have rich Indigenous connections. For example, my own master's research was conducted on Treaty 8 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree Dene and the unceded territory of the Métis people, who continue to act as stewards of the land and water around what is known as Northern Alberta today. I have gained so much from the opportunities to attend university and conduct research on lands that were stolen. As we move our discussions away from campus and towards a very different ring road, I encourage you to seek out the perspectives of those who have nurtured our environment since time immemorial, and to think about how the land where you live has cared for you and how you can reciprocate. Thank you.
Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Nat. I'm thrilled to co-host this morning's session with Taylor as the other conference vice chair. This morning, M. Jackson is joining us to share stories related to her expeditions, explaining how our changing climate is impacting glaciers and the people who rely on them. And this afternoon, we are thrilled to have environmental, cultural, and human rights advocate Sheila Watt-Cloutier. We are hoping these sessions leave you feeling inspired by the people who are on the ground telling the stories of glaciers and cold regions and how to protect them for a more sustainable future. So now, let me introduce you to M. Jackson, our first keynote of the day. Dr. M. Jackson is a multidisciplinary science communicator, a writer, geographer, and glaciologist exploring the intersections of society, glaciology, and climate change. Jackson is a National Geographic Society Explorer, TED Fellow, and 3-time U.S. Fulbright Scholar. Jackson earned a doctorate from the University of Oregon, a Master of Science from the University of Montana, and serves as a U.S. Fulbright Ambassador. An expert for National Geographic expeditions, is the climate and energy host for Crash Course, and lead scientist on Netflix's docu-series, The Pirate Gold of Adak Island. Jackson is a public speaker and author of award-winning books like Ice to Water, The Ice Sings Back, The Secret Lives of Glaciers, and Well Glaciers Slept. Please give a round of applause to welcome Dr. M. Jackson to the stage.
Good morning. Yeah, we have to fix that. Hold on 1 second. Just wait in anticipation of amazing slides. There we go. Okay, well, thank you everyone for having me. And before I even begin, I just want to say thank you very much to Kevin for about 1,000 emails to arrange me coming out here. I really appreciate it. You all have a gem here in this person's patience. So thank you very much, Kevin, for having me out here. It's World Water Day tomorrow, really, but I'm just honored to be out here and talk to you about the water I'm most passionate about. the frozen kind. I'm a glaciologist and a geographer, and I spend a lot of my time going out and talking to people about water in that liquid form or in that frozen form, because I think that's one of the most powerful things about water. It unites us. We can talk about water and phase change and cycles and interactions. People need water to live. That means they can find themselves in that conversation somewhere. And to me, that means we have a beginning point, we have a bridge, we have a commonality, we go from there. Okay, so just to start out, as a water person, most specifically, I'm a geographer and a glaciologist. My work, it centers on understanding and protecting glaciers worldwide. But within that scope, my work takes on all different kinds of areas that I didn't imagine as a graduate student. I didn't imagine when I early on thought what a scientist did. And so today, I'm an explorer for the National Geographic Society, which means I've had the privilege of working from all 7 continents, looking at glaciers, and I promise you, glaciology is always this green, this sunshiny, as you see on the screen right now, okay? It looks always like this. This is the part where I begin to lie to you, okay? I do a great deal of this. I do a lot of public speaking. As a scientist, this is a huge part of my mandate. I go out and I talk to book clubs, I talk to pharmaceutical companies, I talk to different spaces in academia. Anywhere, I do a lot of actual talks in prisons. Any place where I can talk about science, I like to show up and do that. That's part of my job as a scientist. And probably more relevant to the States than in Canada today, I spend a lot of my time trying to show people that scientists are human beings too. That's what we do, okay? So that's a lot. I also do a lot of work as a scientist in film and television. I do a lot of science consulting, science hosting. Really what that means is anytime you're consuming something film and television-wise and it has science in it, I'm over here cringing in the corner because I'm hoping that it is somewhat accurate, adjacent, data adjacent, hopeful that whatever they're portraying. For instance, I was filming a show that you see on the screen right now. I was filming this show for Netflix. We were up in the Arctic, but they needed me to redo some lines in LA during a heat dome. So they had me gear up in all of my Arctic wear, and then it was so darn hot while I was trying to do all this filming that my bare feet are sitting in a bucket of ice. Everything you see on the screen is absolutely true when you're watching how science is depicted today, okay? I also get to do a great deal of educational online web series content. That's just another venue where I can communicate science. For this particular slide, I'm showing you how cool it is. I get to be a climate and energy host for Crash Course, which means they made a cartoon of me. And as a woman, I'm not trying to read into the cartoon or wonder why I don't have a mouth. But we'll just cruise right on over that, okay? Another thing I get to do, I get to write books. As a scientist, I didn't realize that would be a huge part of my career. But if you consider the amount of time I spend either in tents, sitting in front of a glacier hoping something happens, or in an airplane going around all the places I go, I've actually written the majority of my books on the Notes app of my phone. I'm trying to make use of my time the best I can, right? Another big part of what I get to do as a scientist is I get to teach. I get to take students from all over the world in and out of the classroom so they can appreciate our cryosphere and really get excited. And I also get to teach a lot of kindergarten and young kids and try to tell them science is an option for them. So this is my kindergarten energy that you get to see, okay? Another huge part of the work I do is this. I get to be a mother, and this is my son Finnegan. You all in the audience have to, it's just mandatory. I want to hear an ooh and an ah. Cutest baby ever, right? There's only one answer to that, right? I get to take him out into the field. He likes to put glaciers in his mouth. I work with that. It is what it is. Okay, so all of the work that I'm doing, it's pivoting around glaciers. It's pivoting around this measuring, monitoring, predicting what is and is not happening to our world's ice, around how that might impact you and me, how we portray glacier science, glacier stories, who gets to tell those stories, why, when, all of that complicated landscape, how we navigate that tidal zone between science and story and public perceptions of science. This gets to be really complicated, and I spend a lot of time thinking, how do I get people excited about science? How do I tell stories so people are excited about glaciers and science? How do I do that? And I have some fun stories that hopefully get you excited about it. I'll give you an example. So a couple years ago, I was doing about 10 months of field work that looked just like this on the south coast of Iceland. And one night, after working in the field all day, I went back to my house in the town of Hupp, and I was just kind of packing in for the evening when someone knocked on my door. And I opened my door, and there's a guy I've never met, and he says, "Are you the glacier lady?" And I say, "Yes." And he says, "I have something to show you." No adjectives, no explanation. He invited me out. No adjectives, no explanations. He just wanted to show me something. I considered. It was winter, it was dark, it was late. But then again, it's Iceland, one of the safest places in the country, and I am there to study glaciers. So I said sure, and I grabbed my winter gear, and we hopped up into his vehicle, and we drove out of the village in complete silence. And then we drove for another hour in complete silence. And then we got to a nice moss-covered pullout where we hopped out, grabbed some more gear in complete silence. And then we hiked towards a local glacier, a glacier named Breðamergjökull. And we hiked up onto the ice in complete silence. And we got to what I realized was our destination, this area of flat ice that had a bowl in it. And we hiked down to the bottom of the bowl, and I remember looking up and seeing these chunks of ice, these seracs. Think ice that sticks up like shark's fins that were all around this bowl. And my host, he breaks his silence. He says, "We're there." And then he hands me a foam mat and a thermos of coffee, and he explains, "We're gonna wait." So that's what we do. We sit down, we have some coffee, and we wait for 20 minutes. And then we wait for another 20 minutes. And then when I reach that point everyone in this room has been in, when you're sitting on a glacier at night in winter in Iceland with a complete stranger, we've all been there, right? We all know exactly what that's like. It happened. One minute it was dark, and the next minute it wasn't. The next minute, the northern lights, the aurora borealis, started to blaze above us in these yellows and these purples and these pinks, and this bowl of bare ice that I'm sitting in picked up those lights like a kaleidoscope, like a chandelier. I have worked on glaciers all over the world for decades, and I never knew something was like this was possible. To see a glacier turn into a chandelier. It was incredible. Everything that was happening in the sky above us was happening below us and around us. I had never seen something like this. I actually have no idea how long we sat there until eventually the clouds rolled in and we hiked off ice. And in the days and the months since that's happened, there's a part of me that is still standing over there with her jaw on the floor that it was possible to see a glacier light up like a chandelier. To me, it is stories like that that make me say, A, I want to do that science. A, I want to introduce myself into areas of science that I had no idea what was possible. Glaciers push us to reimagine everything, and that's why I love doing this work. Today, we have some 5.8 million square miles of ice still on this planet. About 400,000 glaciers and glacierettes worldwide right now, still today. Now, we define our glaciers as these moving rivers of land ice that persist year after year after year. But within that definition, we have this immense diversity in the types of glaciers we have. Now, I've picked a few non-scientifically chosen just to show you a couple of my favorite glaciers. Okay, don't tell the other glaciers. Okay, we have ice sheets. These are flows of ice that are usually over 50,000 square kilometers that flow unconstrained across a landscape. So today, we have ice sheets in 2 places on the planet. Any guesses? Look at the top of the screen. It'll always help you. We have them in Antarctica. We have them in Greenland. But today, if we were to step outside this building and snap our fingers so that we're 20,000 years ago in the last glacial maximum, and we're looking outside of our building, it would take us about a mile to see the sky because we'd be stepping out into the Laurentide ice sheet. Everything that's here, everything that surrounds us in this landscape was brought to you by ice sheets. which when I was flying in, I just was glued to the window. You all are in one of the most incredible landscapes if you want to understand post-glacial landscapes. It's amazing. Okay, another type of glacier. We have valley glaciers. These are our huge outlets, alpine glaciers. These are flows of ice that are bounded by the mountainous terrain that they move through. And the word through is what I want you to hold on to. These glaciers move through, they sand down, they physically reshape our Earth's crust. And they carve out very distinctive U-shapes, like what you see on the screen right now. Shapes that once you start seeing them, and as you travel about the world, you start seeing them everywhere, even if there's no longer ice. You can start saying to yourself, glacier, glacier, glacier. What created this landscape? How do I read it? I now know ice was here and part of that construction. We have Piedmont glaciers. Anyone familiar with Piedmonts? These are really fun. So you're looking at the Elephant Glacier in Greenland. Piedmonts, they tend to flow from constricted mountain areas out onto a flat plain. But if you were, like 3 days ago, my son, who looked at me and then poured maple syrup all over my kitchen table, I got really impressed because clearly there's a future glaciologist right there, because as that flowed out, right, it made this huge radial shape, which he clearly intended as he was explaining to me how the mechanics of a glacier worked. In my head, he was doing that. In reality, we had cleanup, right? But it's that same concept. You pour that out into a flat area, you get these large lobe shapes. Another type of glacier, these are glacierettes. These are smaller ice masses that are usually formed through drifted or avalanche snow or broken down bits of larger glaciers. This is a glacierette atop Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. For the eagle eyes in the room, if you look into the ash directly behind me, you can see footprints. So it's hard to get scale on how small or big, depending on your point of view, glacierettes can be. So here's the same glacierette, but I'm going to scale out now. You can also still see just barely those footprints in the ash over there. Okay, so glacierettes, they're typically about 1/10 of a square mile or smaller. If anyone was Google fact-checking me earlier when I said we had 400,000 glaciers, usually there's somebody who waves and says that number's wrong because Google says something else. Well, my colleagues don't always count glacierettes. They say they're too small, they're too insignificant, they don't vote. I always tend to count them, so that's why I'll tell you we have about 200,000 glaciers on the planet, and then we have about 200,000 glacierettes worldwide still in existence. Here's another image, and you can clearly see the footprints that are going up through this, right? These glacierettes, these smaller bits, they tend to get neglected when they look at the bigger, shinier glaciers. We don't have a lot of people studying these. Hint, hint, hint to the students in the room. This is an area that you can move into. We don't know a lot about our glacierettes. I'm going to show you another type of glacier that we also don't know all that much about. Does anybody know this glacier? Okay, you're looking at a type of glacier called a rock glacier. Does everyone see it? Okay, for the smart people in the room who already know rock glaciers, there's actually 3 of them in this image. I'm going to outline one of them for you. Does everyone see it now? And then you can follow back with pattern recognition, right? Rock glaciers, they tend to be this debris that is either frozen together with ice or it's glacier ice that's covered and embedded with rocks, all showing some form of past or present flow. This is another rock glacier. This is the Sourdough Rock Glacier in Alaska, where I'm from. Get this. This is a sizable environmental phenomena, right? You wouldn't miss this. Maybe you would say this is a landslide, right? But this is a rock glacier. We don't know how many rock glaciers we have on this planet. Our best estimates put us at as few as 73,000, but those are counts that don't include massive landscapes like the Canadian Arctic, the Russian Arctic, the Himalaya, the Hindu Kush. These are huge environmental phenomena, and we can't really say at a global scale how many we have, what's going on with them, how we might monitor, measure, predict them. We can't say what stories they might hold. I want you to hold that in your mind for just a second. Everything we don't know. And now complicate it with geography. We have this immense diversity in the types of glaciers. I've just shown you a couple, but we have all these different types of glaciers out here. And that diversity of the types of glaciers we have is met only in parallel by where we have glaciers on this planet. I'm an explorer for the Geographic Society, so there's literally no way any of you are gonna get out of this room without at least one world tour. So I'm gonna show you where we have glaciers on this planet, and just like you oohed and awed for Finnegan, feel free if you wanna ooh and ah here, right? So nobody should be surprised. We have glaciers in Alaska and the continental United States. We have glaciers in Canada. There should be a lot of nodding. We do know that. We have glaciers in Greenland, glaciers in Iceland. We have glaciers in Svalbard, in Jan Mayen. We have glaciers in Scandinavia. You're looking at a small hanging valley glacier in Norway right now on the screen. We have glaciers in Central Europe. We have glaciers in Russia, glaciers in China. We have glaciers in Nepal. What you're looking at on the screen right now is a gathering of Sherpas at the Everest Base Camp. This is a gathering of people whose everyday lives connect to what's happening to the ice. We have glaciers on the Indian subcontinent. So what you're looking at on the screen is the Gangotri Glacier, which is at the headwaters of the Holy Ganges River. If you're not familiar and stare at ice all day like I do, follow the brown flow of water all the way up into the center. Glaciers aren't always white. They can often be many, many different colors. A lot of times they're often brown, especially on the edge, the terminus of the glacier. We have glaciers in Pakistan. So what you're looking at on the screen, this is the lower Baltoro Glacier covered with sediments. So just to explain the image a little, everything that's flat and looks like it's covered with gravel, that's glacier. And then if you want to get scale and size, go all the way to the fore area of the image, and you're going to see some people packing towards that ice. We have glaciers throughout northern and central Asia. We have glaciers in the Caucasus. We have glaciers in the Middle East. This is a glacier atop Mount Damavand, and I love this image. I have not had a chance to go repeat this image, but if you look at the billboard in front, it's showing a ton more snow and ice than is what is still in existence today. We have glaciers in Africa. I feel like I spend a lot of my time, especially with young people, saying, yes, we have glaciers in Africa. Yes, there are glaciers in Africa. We have glaciers in the tropics. We have glaciers across South America. We have glaciers in the southern Andes and Patagonia. Does anybody recognize the mountain line in the back of this image? It'll wave a little bit at you. So you're looking at Fitzroy, but if you just look at that up and down mountain line back, following from the Horsehead all the way over, it'll look a little bit familiar to you, maybe if you're familiar with the American Apparel brand Patagonia, and if you've ever seen their label, because that up and down little line back there is this mountain line right here. And now that I've given you this amazing piece of information, I expect next time you see someone wearing Patagonia to walk up to them and say, "Glacier!" What a great way to start a conversation, right? Share some science in that very moment. All the ice that you're learning from me, now you can pass that knowledge on in that very moment. Okay, you all have your mission. Okay, we have glaciers in New Zealand, we have glaciers in Antarctica, and I admit the next photo I'm sharing with you is entirely gratuitous, but we have glaciers on my very favorite sub-Antarctic island called South Georgia Island, which, if you're like writing down all the hazards of being a glaciologist, I fall on the ice all the time, etc. For this, you have to walk through 100,000 breeding pairs of king penguins just to get to the Haney Glacier in the background. The life is difficult, okay? I was so distracted. Small non-glacier footnote. Does everyone see the penguins that look like they're wearing like knights? What is this? What's the Game of Thrones people? They guard the wall. Knights of the Night's Watch, right? Okay, we'll move on. You're all looking at me. I might be the only person here. Okay, so here's your recap, just to follow up, right? We have glaciers in the poles. We have glaciers in America, Europe, Asia, Africa. We have glaciers worldwide, with the exception of Australia, but that's okay because Australia has amazing landscapes. She just can't have all of them, right? So here's what I want you to focus on. Everywhere these diverse glaciers are located, they are located within inhabited and historic environments. Memorize this sentence. Where there are glaciers, there are people. And the two have been interacting for the entirety of human history, but we actually don't know that much about people and ice because for just a long time, we didn't think people and ice were connected. So today, this lag has left this massive knowledge disparity, which when we look at the field of glaciology, it tends to be dominated by a focus on the mechanics, on the measuring and monitoring and predicting, which is giving us valuable information about what's happening to our planet's ice, but it is leaving out how what is happening to our planet's ice impacts all of us, impacts our plant communities, impacts our river communities, impacts everything else. And this has resulted in our picture of glaciers being far from complete. And this takes on pretty big consequences, especially today, because today glaciers are narrated as one of the most visible manifestations of global climate change. Every one of you in this room are probably familiar with this to some degree. We see iterations of it in film, in media, and newspaper. Academia, stories of climate change are full of image after image after image of glaciers materially retreating. Evidence that yes, climate change is happening, and yes, human beings are transforming Earth systems. But if you shake that just a little bit and ask, what does that actually mean? We all did a world tour. You now know there are diverse glaciers, and you know they're all over this planet. What does it actually mean in these inhabited and historic landscapes to have all these glaciers changing? How does what is happening to them impact people in the past, in the present, and the future? Questions like this is what I work on. This is what really makes my brain just start to buzz as I pull apart these questions. And I've worked all over the world, but for the last 20 years, I've been mainly focused in the country you see on the screen right now, Iceland. Iceland is one of those odd places where people and ice have been intimately linked since this island was first settled by Norse seafarers around, I never remember this year, around the year 871 or so, plus or minus 1 or 2, okay? So Iceland has about 400 glaciers in total. 269 of them have names that date all the way back to settlement. And while I've worked all over the island, I focused a lot of my work on the southeastern coast, on the southern side of the ice cap Vatnajökull, where there's about 30 outlet glaciers that cascade down like the teeth of a comb, right? And they're coming down on this very odd 125-mile narrow stretch of sparsely inhabited coastland, which is literally squeezed between the ice cap to the north and the North Atlantic to the south. People here literally live with glaciers in their backyards. But like glaciers everywhere, glaciers are fluctuating in multitudes of complex ways to local, regional, and global environmental dynamics. Local glaciology models are predicting that Iceland's ice will lose about 25 to 35% of present volume over the next 50 years, mostly as a result of increasing air temperatures related to climate change. This is the glacier I talked about at the beginning. This is that I saw turn into a chandelier. This is the glacier Breiðamerjajökull. Breiðamerjajökull is one of the glaciers that I keep coming back to. It's Iceland's third largest glacier. It's about 8.5 miles wide. It flows over 28 miles. And my colleague, one of my research colleagues, Kieran Baxter, he created this photo comparison so you can see how one glacier has been responding to increasing air temperatures from about 1982 to 2020. And what we're looking at is a recession rate that has vastly accelerated. And this glacier has lost about 3 miles of ice length, which is a pretty significant amount when you start looking at this. But from a fieldwork standpoint, as the glacier Breiðamerjajökull has recessed, access has gotten pretty tricky. When I first started studying this glacier, I used to be able to hike from the mountain straight out onto the ice. And then as the ice started to recess, it bloomed a very large lagoon, which I would use a Zodiac boat to get across. And then that lagoon drained, and now it has a large river coming off of it, and locals have built the bridge that you see in the center of this image, what I use to hop back on there. So I come back to this glacier, not only to monitor its unique recession patterns and understand what's happening to ice in this part of Iceland, but also to see how this glacier and the stories attached to this glacier show up in the local community. So take a second. Look at this image and look at where the bridge is. Just take a second and take that in. So get this. This is the stories we are told. Where this bridge is in the center of the image, this is a place that was once, upon Iceland's settlement well over 1,000 years ago, once rich vegetated meadow and thick green birch forests. When the Norse seafarers came here and settled, I can imagine them instantly knowing they hit jackpot. They raised their farms here. They raised their families, their futures for hundreds of years right here. So this is the same glacier, but I've spun you now 180 and we're looking south. So this is Breiðamergjökull, and if you follow the water down, you'll come to a choke point in the center of the image, and that's where that bridge is, okay? When I walk around this entire area today, all these gray, dark, sandy forelands, I think about how green, how livable this whole valley used to be, all the way up until about the 1600s or so, when the planet's climate changed. It started to cool with the onset of the Little Ice Age, and how up valley from this particular point, the glacier Breiðamergjökull, it started to respond to that planetary cooling by growing larger, by advancing, by heading down this valley, heading straight for all those families, those futures, those farms. Glaciers do not move consistently, contrary to everything you've ever seen in Hollywood, okay? They're usually about 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps forward, right? They're inconsistent. Here, this glacier, it started to respond to those cooling temperatures by advancing a little forward, a little back, a little more forward, grinding down everything in front of it like sandpaper, forcing families who lived in farms, just like the little tiny farmhouse you see in the center of this image, forcing those people every day to step outside of their homes, turn around, and look up valley to see where the glacier was that day. Because they had to make a decision. Do they go or do they stay? A decision that's actually rather similar to the decision that thousands and thousands of people make today as they stand on the edge of the Mediterranean, as they stand on the edge of the Rio Grande. They turn around, they see changing environments, and they make a decision, do I go or do I stay? And here, this glacier Breiðamergjökull, it took the decision away. This glacier, it just grew bigger and bigger and bigger, and people fled before it because they could not live there anymore. This ice grew so big that it pushed down, it weighed down the south coast of Iceland, allowing the North Atlantic to come in and flood everything, sinking the fishing grounds and the once safe boat harbors that people had used for hundreds of years here. Everything radically changed. But in any good story, we can skip around, right? So we'll advance to the end of the 1800s. The Little Ice Age started to pack up her furniture and move on along. And this glacier, Breiðamergjökull, it started to respond to new climate, a warming climate, by taking 1 step forward and 5 steps back. And Icelanders, they saw this area becoming ice-free again. So they started to move back in, mooring their fishing boats in those harbors that rose out of the sea, rebuilding again their farms and families, but this time only ever building on high points, because they knew the ice would come back. It always had before. Another jump in time, another century gone. But the ice has not behaved at all like it used to. Climate change has pushed this glacier, Breiðamergjökull, into a backward march towards gone. And this ice is deteriorating quicker than ice has ever deteriorated in human history before. So I have sat across so many kitchen tables on the south coast of Iceland, politely drinking coffee so thick you can chew it, listening to people tell me stories, how they fear glacier recession, how it might not ever stop and the ice might disappear completely down to the last snowflake, and how they ask me, can you still be Icelandic in Iceland if there is no ice? So as we start talking about glaciers and we start talking about climate change, part of that conversation includes conversations about historic identity, present identity, future identity. What is the future of a people when they are connected to an environment in the midst of radical change? I've walked across farms here with so many local people who tell me that they are grateful that the ice is getting smaller, because that means it can no longer flood, it can no longer surge forward and destroy farms and families and futures like it did over and over in the past. People here tell me for the first time there might be safety living with ice here. Their stories of environmental hazards, of living with changing environments, are generational. They stretch back, the stories they say over and over again, hundreds and hundreds of years in the past. So when we are talking about environmental change and climate change and glaciers, we have to ask ourselves, in what way has living with environmental hazards over generations impacted how people experience and understand the change before them now? I've had people lay bank statements down in front of me and say that as glaciers melt, they melt money. Because millions of tourists are coming to see the ice before it's gone, what my colleagues call last chance tourism. And Icelanders and Greenlanders and Alaskans and people who live in big ice systems today, their bank accounts are filling up. Here in Iceland, locals are running glacier tourism businesses and opening hotels and restaurants and renting vehicles, and then they're taking their entire family on vacations to Tenerife, and they tell me they have finally, because the glaciers are melting, found economic security, something historically they have never had since settlement in this area. I've been out on boats listening to fishermen tell me that economic insecurity is coming now, and they fear for the future of this region because the glaciers are melting and the land keeps rising via isostatic rebound. If you imagine a sponge in your hand and you press your sponge down, take your hand away, that sponge, it'll spring right on back up, right? Here, look at this image, everything that's green. The glaciers push the land down. As the ice melts, the land is rising. It is rising faster than the seas are rising. So you're looking at the town of Hupp, and all that green is brand new land that is rising out of the ocean, making the best harbor on the south coast too shallow, too full of sediments. So that means cruise ships can't come in and out, so there goes that industry. Fishing boats are struggling to enter and exit. And fishermen are telling me this can't go on much longer. They know economic instability is coming to this area. And then I've been listening to parents who put kids on their laps in front of me and say, glaciers are melting, but now we can have a family here. That means they don't have to move to the one city in Iceland that has the services, the doctors, the schools, the daycares, the pediatricians. When I first started 15, 20 years ago working out on the south coast of Iceland, the demographics were pretty stark. You never saw kids because there was no supporting services. But now the government is increasing services as tourism increases. And suddenly you have clinics and schools and hospitals. And the way people interpret that is the glaciers are melting and they can have families out here living in the countryside where they want to safely raise their kids. They don't have to move to the city because the glaciers are melting. For years, I have been walking across this one single glacier with colleagues and friends and local people. And just like all of us are trying to make sense of the changes in our own backyards worldwide, so too are all of these people. And this is what I think about as I work with glaciers. What is so, to me, clearly powerful about ice. Ice makes visible things that appear abstract, like senses of identity, spiritual and cultural values, our economies, our senses of safety, our senses of future, where we can raise our children. Glaciers make visible things like climate change, human history, timescales, what stories we're a part of, what stories we're not a part of, what stories we don't believe. Breiðamergjökull, this is one glacier out of the 400 in Iceland. One glacier out of the 400,000 glaciers and glacierettes worldwide today. I cannot underscore to you enough that there are so many connections between people and ice, but we are just now beginning to look for them. We are just now beginning to understand them and value them. And that connection between people and ice, it is so critical for us to understand. People can't care about something they don't know about. For me, my work revolves around that single concept that if I can teach people about ice, they can care about it. With knowing comes caring, and then with caring, there's that hope word that can come right behind that, right? I think about that a lot. With caring comes hope, because we know there is hope. We've all seen those models, right? We all know that it is possible to slow unprecedented glacier recession, to slow the rate of melt. And here comes a series of ifs. If we chose to work together to get our temperatures down, our models are showing it is possible that our glaciers can slow their rate of recession and potentially grow back. That's worth repeating, right? Our glaciers, they could grow back. I think a lot about that, right? There's that possibility to live in a future with healthy ice systems if we did something now. So many big ifs, right? But also there's that other component to glaciology. Everyone in this room, you probably have heard the jokes about how slow glaciers are. There is truth there, right? We know glacier response time is slow. That means if we magically started to work together, we magically got our temperatures down and glaciers could respond. That means likely the ice will not respond in my lifetime. The ice is not going to respond in my son's lifetime. But just because I'm never going to see the results of the work I do, all the places I travel, all the advocacy work I do for glaciers, it doesn't make my work any less important. Because probably, I would guess, just like every one of you here, I'm in this for the long time. I don't need to see the results of my work. That would be a bonus. I just want to believe that that change is possible, that what we're working on can have an impact for our future generations. Because what I have come to realize, what ice has taught me, is that ice influences us just as much as we influence ice. And that definitely tells us that what happens to the ice is happening to us. I'm going to pause here for a moment, and then I think take any questions that Nate was going to facilitate. Thank you very much. We're getting there. Oh, I'm on.
Wonderful. Thank you, Eric. And thank you, Em, for sharing these stories. It was so wonderful to hear and so inspiring. So I have some prepared questions for you on stories in science, your journey, and hope for the future. And so while I go through some of these prepared questions, I'd also like to intersperse these with questions from the audience. So if you have a question, you can certainly raise your hand, and then we'll bring a mic to you, okay? But Em, I thought we could start with the tip of the iceberg, and then we'll go deep. So I want to ask you, why do you think sharing stories related to cold regions and glaciers is important? And how do these stories coexist with natural science?
Those are big questions, and I appreciate them. I think sharing stories about ice are so critical because I'm in direct competition with all my colleagues at the National Geographic Society, who take the most beautiful pictures of ice. They take these glorious, amazing images, which then we see on billboards and in magazines and everywhere. And I always stare at them and think, that's so beautiful, and there's no people in them. And when I started out in my career, I would be out I'd be out in the field with some film team or whatever, and they would always say, we want you to go stand out far off on the glacier, and we're going to get you a fan so your hair can be blowing, and we're going to take this amazing image of you. And my ego in the back of my brain is saying, yes, I really want that image because I'll look amazing. But that is not what my science looks like. If I'm out there all by myself on a glacier, I'm probably going to slide and die. I don't do science like that. My science doesn't look like that. I am roped up to a bunch of people, and we are safely navigating whatever we're doing. Most of the places I'm working with local people on the ice. This is not, as much as my ego would love for this to be the M. Jackson show, it's not. It's a big pack of people. And that pack of people have stories and experiences. My job is to tell you those stories and experiences, because ice is not melting in a vacuum. Science is not done in a vacuum. We are constantly working with people. We're constantly accumulating experiences. We're constantly reacting to what's happening to us. And so sharing those stories, in my brain, I hope that makes sense to some people as they're trying to understand what it is I'm explaining. They might find a relatability point. And that gets really important later on when we talk about, especially in the States, how scientists are increasingly treated and looked at with suspicion. I go places and there's a lot of security now because suddenly science is under this big cloud of suspicion. So I would rather tell people about what my science actually looks like, tell them the stories of the places I go and how what is happening out there impacts other people, so we could build those bridges of empathy and then figure out a future forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I love that idea of building bridges of empathy. And I want to highlight a point that you raised in your talk. You had mentioned that without ice, without glaciers, are Icelanders still Icelanders? And I have a question related to that, but I need to crack your book, because I have your book here, The Secret Lives of Glaciers. I would highly recommend this book.
This is a PR moment here. I paid him for this.
Yeah, great book. I know all the secrets now, so that's good. But I wanted to read one or two quotes and ask you a question. So, you say here that we live in an ice-dependent world, and you also ask, who will people be without ice? So how do you think the disappearance of ice will impact people who live close to glaciers and those far away?
I think we live in an ice-dependent world.
Yeah.
I also think we live in a moss-dependent world. I think we live in a redworm-dependent world and in a kangaroo-dependent world. I think we have an amazing diversity of everything on this planet. And who are we to say, time's up and out you go? I don't want to live on a planet that says sand dunes, we don't need these. Oceans, we don't need these. I love living in a world with complexity and awe. And to me, glaciers have that. The thing I think about all the time is that we have glaciers on this planet. How damn lucky are we? And so therefore, who wants to be in charge of their right to exist? I don't want that power. Wouldn't it be great to understand them and understand them in all of these complex ways of knowing and then be richer for it? We live in an ice-dependent world because everything is dependent to one another. And I think that's marvelous.
Thank you. Yeah, it's such a complex world. That's wonderful. I would now like to take a question from the audience, if someone has one. Please, yeah.
Hi, I really enjoyed your talk. I didn't know glaciers could be that beautiful.
Yes!
Thank you for that. So from what you said, there seems to be conflicting interests in respect to glaciers in some of these regions. Like you made mention, some locals feel they can have families in some regions where the glaciers are melting and the tourism sector is also benefiting. So from your experience, are the locals actually interested in what you as a researcher and others do to try to save the glaciers?
Let me see if I'm understanding your question correctly. Are locals interested in my efforts to save glaciers? Again, my ego is over here going, yes. Yes. I think local people from many areas are interested in their own efforts to work with their own glaciers. And then my job is to come in and take whatever spotlight I have and amplify and rise up, the work that's already being done. And that work can just be different ways people know glaciers collect water, worship with pole and ice core, that huge range of what you can do with ice. Some people don't really interact with glaciers at all, and some people do. And to me, that's a perfectly natural way things are. It's just dependent on the place. And so I think when I come into different places, my job first is to find out what has already been done, and then what I can do to amplify those efforts. Thanks for that question.
Thank you. You had mentioned as well that people are, I think, connected to your research on glaciers in Iceland because glaciers relate to economic security. And I think that certainly incentivizes people to be interested in your work. And just thinking to your book, because I really, really love this joke that you made in your book.
Go on.
Go on, okay. You had said that, this ecotourism industry in Iceland, they're calling glaciers. So they say, we're advertising this tour for Valnajökull Glacier, which I thought was funny because you said that Jökull means glacier, so Valna Glacier. And I think that's, it's funny that people are advertising in that way to make it more accessible to tourists. I wanted to ask you a question about ecotourism, though, and certainly you talked about this in your talk. But how has ecotourism of glaciers benefited Iceland, and do you have concerns?
I think dependent on who you are and where you are, and if you've had all your coffee that day, you're going to have different views on the value of something, right? And because we are these complex, amazing human beings, we can hold all of these values simultaneously and say, I see all the good here, the bad here, and everything in between. I get annoyed. I will admit it, I'm a human being. I'm out there, and I get really annoyed when people mess with the equipment that I've got. Oh, man, stickers, or when in the States, when people shoot at my equipment, I'm having a bad day, okay? And so you see a lot more people, we have a lot of cameras set up and various pieces of equipment on Breiðamerarjökull and Vatnajökull, and more people are coming out. And so you see them interacting with that equipment. And I hope most people are just posing and making cool photos with them. That's not always the case. Glaciers are one of those things. You do kind of need to see it to get it, to experience it, to smell it. You can blindfold me and put me in most glaciers in Iceland, and I can tell you which one because the sound quality is so different. The smell of the ice is so different in these places. I'm excited that people are seeing different glaciers in Iceland. I also want them to mandatorily sit down in front of me and let me educate them on glaciers for an hour. So then they all go back home and then repeat word for word everything I've told them, right? What a moment for science communication. What a moment for economic security. They are extracting and taking something beautiful in photographs from something, though, that is saying climate change is happening, and it's happening in an uncontrolled and really terrifying rate. So all of that gets in. So can I say the over-tourism that's occurring in Iceland is good or bad? It has a lot of complexities. And our job in telling those stories is to always know that stories is plural. We can't say all of tourism is good or bad. We can't take a photograph of a glacier that is just ice with no people in there, right? We can't do that. We have to lean into that complexity, even if we're telling our friends, wait, I'm not done yet. I've got 10 more minutes to tell you about this thing, right? We have to share the complexities of those stories.
Thank you. I'd like to take another question from the audience if there's someone who'd like to offer a question.
Talk about coffee.
Please. I'll just give you the microphone. That's great. Thank you, Leonard.
Once again, wonderful talk. I think a lot of us young scientists are probably asking ourselves, the dream job is, the UN, National Geographic, and all of that. So I guess, what is your advice to those young scientists to moving towards those type of spaces, I guess? Because I know not everyone's going to work at National Geographic or their dream job, but yeah, what are those initial steps that people can take? And how does that maybe relate to the work that you're currently doing, if that makes sense?
I think everyone has a different dream job, and I think that understanding that individuality is really important. when you are in academia, you're often given a set of options for what post-academia looks like. Often it's go in to be a professor, go into industry. You get a kind of a set series of what a career can look like. And that might work for you. But if it doesn't, holding on to what that doesn't look like and doing exactly what you just did, which is asking the questions. I have spent a lot of my career trying not to let how someone else views what a career is be in my head. Because I've always wanted to do what I wanted to do and pay my bills and make sure that I'm safe. And those two things are always in tension, right? I have had to take some jobs I wouldn't have imagined I would have to do just to make sure my bills are paid and then continue forward, right? I think a lot of the work that I have done and the way I have a career today involves damn good mentorship. Informally, I never had the opportunity to finish high school. I grew up pretty remote. And so for me, I self-selected out of college. I self-selected out of science. I knew that because I hadn't finished this one important step, everything else was off the table. But that's a narrative I told myself. And one day, I finally told somebody else that narrative. And when they got done laughing at me, they said, "You got lots of other options," and they told me. And so whatever it is that you're envisioning, I think having the courage to talk to one another and to talk to people at different career stages and say, this is what I'm thinking. I want to make sure I'm getting paid, but I also want to do a lot of travel. I'm not ready to do this or this. I want to do this. And learning to articulate that, even if it sounds like something else is brand new, that nobody else has done that before, having that courage to say it over and over, and then if you get to where that place that you thought you wanted and it doesn't work, don't stay. Keep going and do something else. It's that flexibility that has allowed me to have the career I've had today. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
And I'd like to add to Jordan's question and ask you a bit more about your story. How did you make the transition from PhD student to book author to explorer?
The first part of that is I remember a very awkward conversation with my doctoral committee, where I had to have the conversation about what happens to my dissertation. I felt very passionate that I wanted to publish it, and I wanted to publish it outside of academic channels because I spent so much of my time talking to friends back in Alaska, talking to friends in Iceland who were like, what are you doing? Why are you in school? Who's gonna read that? What? What words did you just use? The science that I was learning wasn't translatable. And so figuring out how do I make all of the product of my work translatable, that became very big. And what my committee kept telling me is, you'll be fine. Write a dissertation, we'll put it in the university library. It's there if anyone wants to read it. Which to me sounded absolutely not what I wanted. We'll leave that there. And so I did something that I still today am looking back on and being like, wow, well done self. I started writing a book, and I wrote it for general science. And I did that as my dissertation. And I definitely did not answer emails and navigated all the in-person check-ins with my committee while not showing them anything I was producing. And then I got halfway in and gave them first drafts. And then I think that's when they realized the ship had sailed. And then I started checking in and sending out to other people. I found publishers. I found a list of publishers based on the books I love to read that were about general science and the environment. And I sent them emails, and then when they didn't respond, I sent them more emails, and then when they didn't respond, I sent them more emails. Persistence, folks. That's how you get this. And eventually someone replied and said, show me what you've got, and I'd already had half, right? And so I sent. And that started a conversation. And as soon as I had a publishing contract, my dissertation committee got on board. They were very excited, and we went forward. And then I realized there are people out there on this planet who love to tweet, or are we Xing? They just love short-form science. There are people who will make videos all day long, and I am not that person. I love long-form, and I love to write. It's what I like to do on planes. It's what I like to do in tents. It's what I've liked to do as my child has been sleeping in a nursery. I just like to write. And so I've kept doing that, and I've kept writing books. I have 3 more that I'm working on right now that are just equally very exciting, and I can borrow you about them at another time. But it's what I like to do. And so that gets back to this earlier question of how do you know you're on that right path, right? I'm thrilled when I get to work. And when I'm not thrilled, usually if a couple weeks go by and I'm still not thrilled, I start to reassess. The idea of having 85,000 words and figuring out where the comma goes and if this sentence makes sense, that just makes my heart beat, right? I'm there for that. You all might not be. Find what you are there for, right?
And would you speak to your role as an explorer too, and how you found that role?
Okay, I'm so lucky and things have changed. But 2017, I got an email that said with the header, please do not delete, this is for real. Which, thank you. Do you not all just automatically know this is spam and then don't open it? So I didn't open it. So then they called and they said, the Geographic said, we want to name you an explorer. And today, if you apply for and get a grant from the National Geographic Society, you are automatically an explorer. But when I was named one, you were not. I was in a class of 12 other people, and my life changed like that. Because I used to go and give talks, and a couple people would listen, a couple people would show up. But when you have the National Geographic Society with you, that stage changes. And suddenly this thing that I was like, me and 4 other people are super excited about ice, and we'd get together once a year and talk about ice. Suddenly I could work with my colleagues and say, I have actually not been out to the Ruwenzori's. Can someone give me some images? And then there's amazing photographers who are saying, here's some images from the Ruwenzori's, and I can talk about these glaciers at a whole other scale. And that changed everything. It also allowed me, with the Geographic, they would send me all over the world to different places that I don't think I could have funded, or being a US citizen, if I apply through the National Science Foundation, that's 2 to 3 years with a very low acceptance rate. And suddenly I'm able to go out to these places. I'm in Antarctica most years. I'm able to amplify. And that's what being an explorer has done. I get to find all these other people doing cool research, highlight it, and then continue my own. And it's just amazing.
So inspiring. And I want to say to all of the supervisors here, be warned, Em told us we're all going to write books now. That's our path, so might have to have some hard conversations.
Kevin is deleting our contract right now.
But Em, you beautifully talked about your journey, and I want to ask, with these different roles, scientist, author, an explorer, and even a mother, how do you leverage those different hats to protect glaciers and share your work?
It's this. I think it's important when I tell you about glaciers that I also tell you that I'm a mother. I think it's important when I talk about glaciers to also tell you all these other things, because I am not just one thing. Glaciers are not just one thing. We're going to be bringing our whole selves to our science. We're going to be bringing our whole selves to whatever it is that we love to do. And that's what I think a lot about. I don't think that everyone here should be a glaciologist. You can, and we need you, and you're welcome. But whatever it is that you are tied up about, you should think about if that's what you want to focus on. And what I mean most specifically by that is that if you are super into trees, think about all the ways that you can do tree work for the rest of your life. I'm super into glaciers. I had no idea I would be doing stuff for Netflix and Disney and all of this, but glaciers are my through line. So I've always been able to focus on ice while exploring and growing my own life. And that's been really exciting. Being able to take my child out onto the ice, one of the most extraordinary things that has ever happened to me. It was amazing. He was so not into it. I was, and that was okay. I was really excited that he was there. He was super excited about the steps from the parking lot, not the 4-mile hike in or being on the ice. He just wanted to play on the steps right there, and I was like, okay, that's a parental win. I think if I want people to care about ice, I have to care about it, which means I have to find a way. Life is very long. How do I continue? I continue to grow as a person. And that means bringing all these different new ways of talking about ice into this. This conversation will constantly develop and grow, and I'm there for that. The idea that there's a single story about ice. Ice melts. Someone always tells me when I walk in a room, oh, you care about ice, therefore you must be a historian. All of that, I'm just not here for that anymore. It doesn't do anything. Ice doesn't have a single story. All of us are gonna bring our whole selves into whatever it is we're passionate about and then tell those complexities, that nebula of stories, which I think then allows us to get excited about it too. Who here is slightly excited about ice now? Ah, see, I've done this, okay.
You got them.
I got it, yeah.
And it's cool to hear you do work with Disney. I did not know that. I think you should have an appearance in the next Frozen. I think that would be ideal. I would watch that.
So Nate is also my new agent.
This is how we do it. I'd like to take another question from the audience, please.
Wonderful talk, stories, and you're just an excellent communicator.
Go on.
So you mentioned there's beautiful photos of glaciers, but so often without people. So you add the people in. But there's not many people that live directly within or near glaciers, so they really don't get that idea. And so we have the inverse here in this part of the world. As you mentioned, the glaciers are long gone, but they were here. So we take a picture in the landscape, and there's no glacier, but there's people and a remnant landscape. So as a communicator, how do you get that through to people to invigorate them and connect them to the ice you see, the movement, the dynamic, the enormity?
I mean, there's really just nothing better than being able to go out in your backyard and have a wee dig around, right? And talk about what you find and what that relates back to. I think that's one of the powers of water, one of the powers of any aspect of science, is that we are teaching at its core geomorphology. We are teaching somebody how to read a landscape. We're teaching somebody how to walk outside and see a lot of sharp mountains and know maybe ice didn't roll through, over it. So what created that? Is the feature they're looking at depositional? Is it erosional? What's going on? What's the angle of repose? Like that kind of thing. Oh, how's your heart not starting to beat right there, right? So teaching somebody that it isn't about that one thing. Look in your backyard and you'll connect it to the ice age or to a peatland or to a marsh. It's how do you translate what you're seeing? Because we can change and understand any particular aspect. I've walked through this whole space and I've learned a lot about a lot of different very, very, very specific topics, right, on each one of these posters. Someone put a lot of time and effort into each one of those, right, into that area. They now have to communicate it, which is the beginning back here. I don't think that everyone needs to walk through a landscape and say, I can connect this back to the last glacial maximum. I want them to, don't get me wrong, but they don't have to. What I want them to do is engage with the landscape they're walking in and connect it to X thing, that science they know, that random fact about irrigation that I just learned from Nate, right? I want them to be able to engage with. Landscapes are not static. This landscape here is deeply connected to something that occurred 20,000 years ago. So that's the obvious connection. But they might be wondering what happens if there's no lakes at all, and what does the future look like? I want them to engage in landscapes, and to me, the obvious start is science. And that means people might super be into rocks, they might be super into trees or plants or animals. Whatever it is, it's that raft that takes them forward. And that's what our jobs are, is for all of you to then go forward and be like, I learned all this stuff about ice, let's have a coffee, I'm telling you this now. We have to communicate the work we're doing. That's what our critical mandate is today. I think I might have dodged some of that, but
So
there
not
we
just photoshopping a picture of incredible ice on top of this landscape.
And how do you even understand that? Like, you're in Antarctica, right? How do you understand how thick that ice is underneath you? We understand thickness by, is it breaking and am I dying, right? And we're still working on that. I don't know if people need to understand ultimately how thick something is or how it flows so much as, wow, that's cool, right?
Thanks, Sam. Let's take another question from the audience.
Hi. I'm gonna follow on John's question, actually. I really liked that you talked about how you went into the communities and talked with locals about your work. So for grad students who are doing work in cold regions, for instance, we're not there for that long because it's also very expensive to do work in the north.
Yes.
So if we're not there for that long, what's some advice that you could give for grad students to communicate their work or engage with the community, I guess? Or if you could give examples of what you did when you were first getting started, just so we're not just being super like scientific-y all the time or just giving talks every time we go up there. So just wondering if there's anything different that we could do.
I love the awareness and concern that is scaffolding the question you're asking. I'm at, my research station is called Nyhammer on the south coast of Iceland. You're all welcome. It's a beautiful, wonderful place. We have a stuffed reindeer. It's very exciting. My colleagues and I, we have a joke that we learn more about what's happening to the ice in south coast Iceland when we have all these Google searches set up when someone publishes a paper. They don't come by our research station. We have people at our research station that have lived there for generations and know that ice. And then we get researchers who come in. We didn't know they came in. We didn't know they were there. We didn't know that they left. We didn't know anything. Sometimes I run into random equipment out on the ice. I don't know whose that is. I often leave a card. Science, for a long time, has had a parachuting problem. And to broaden your question a little bit, how does a graduate student engage with histories of science that are not great for local communities? The first thing is to ask the question you're asking. How? How do I? Where do I? How do I get there? And think through that. Each place is going to have a different answer. But the act of knowing a community is on you, the graduate student, is on your professors, is on anybody choosing to walk into a community. The impetus is on you. The burden is on you. The community does not need to explain itself to you. There's a community a colleague and I work on that's in the Ruwenzori's. And for a long time, the people who have lived in this area have dealt with researchers, white researchers who come in who say, how you understand this is so wrong. Because these people say this story. They say, for a long time we've known that we are protected by God because we live up in the mountains by these glaciers, and God lives in these glaciers, and we look down valley and there's malaria there. But malaria is not up where we live, so we know that God lives in these glaciers and we are protected. But that story has changed in the last 10 years or so. Because the ice is getting smaller, these people now have a new story. They say, we are not living correctly and God is mad at us because the ice is getting smaller and malaria is coming up the valley. Shake a story like that for any kind of public health, right? And what we know is that the microclimate is changing. And so now the glaciers aren't able to provide as cool a climate in this landscape. And so now we have malaria coming up, right? Same story, different language. But researchers coming in and saying, you don't understand this properly. You are not using the correct language. That is not a service to the community that is there, right? As researchers find out how that community communicates. They might spend a lot of time on social media. They might not. You need to talk to people and come in first saying, I don't know, can you teach me? And be very gracious when they say, we don't have time because we have lives to live. Your job is to read everything. Your job is to make a good choice as a graduate student of whether it's appropriate for you to do the research in that place, or would it be a better match to say who's already doing work there and can we work together, which requires a great deal of legwork. I don't know if that's taught. I don't know if that's pressed. Because you have, for a master's degree, 2 years. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of expense. You need to be writing your grant applications very early on. So maybe the system needs to be rethought. There's all these complexities, and I'm terribly sorry to tell you, I don't have a neat answer for you. Besides, I would just like to flag some praise that you asked that question, that you are thinking about that. Thank you.
To add to that answer and to reflect on your book, you mentioned that Iceland has a great history of community monitors. And I wanted to know, how you've collaborated and worked with community monitors in Iceland.
I've worked with community monitors because I went in as a graduate student with my list of questions that my committee had pre-approved. And I walked up with all of my questions. And are you sad that glaciers are melting? How sad is it that glaciers are melting? Glaciers are melting, should the world be sad? You know, my questions. And I held them up and I realized, shit. I had met all of these monitors, these people who were so generous with their time and place and space to show me around and acclimate me to this landscape. And none of my questions worked. I presupposed the answers to all of my questions. All of my questions, I had just put myself in there, and it didn't work.
Okay.
So that was an awkward email to my dissertation committee. I am changing everything because it wasn't appropriate, it didn't work. And so then being able to meet with monitors, and if you haven't read this book, Iceland has a great deal of farmers or school teachers or people of all different professions who their job is to monitor the ice. And they have done this for years and years and years. It's actually really amazing. And you can walk with these people and learn the stories of what happened when their grandfather did this or this person, or when the river used to be here, but now the river is here. All the different changes of a landscape, often walking just with monitors can teach you all of these stories. And so I realized, and the email to my dissertation committee involved a lot of this. I actually don't know what my new questions are. Going to spend the next 6 months listening, will report back with new questions.
Wow. That's amazing to hear how you iterated and adapted, and it doesn't sound easy. It sounds
It was
challenging
utterly
and-
humiliating,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
it wouldn't have been true science. It wouldn't have been
course.
good research, and it would not have been fair to anybody.
Yeah, and I think some of us in this audience too who work with communities have experienced those same experiences too. Yeah, thank you, Em. Are there any other questions from the audience, please? We'll get the microphone.
Thank you for the presentation. 25 years ago, when the first wave of books on climate change started to show up, there were all kinds of ideas. Some of it was conspiracy, disinformation. But there was one sort of concept that was circulating, and it sort of suggested a cause for concern and perhaps fear that the glaciers were starting to melt even 25 years ago at such a rate. Flooding areas, low-lying areas were starting to flood, like Nova Scotia, New York City, and Florida, and that whole scenario was starting to unfold as being somewhat true, that low-lying areas were starting to flood. And there was a fear that the weight of water in the world was changing to such a degree that maybe the Earth's orbit could be altered to some degree. I apologize for showing up late for the meeting. Maybe you covered this already, but is the Earth's orbit really safe with all the shifting ice that is resulting in water moving in all kinds of new directions? Thanks.
No problem. A great question. Very rarely do I get a new question, and I really like the newness of this when I've not been asked this. To take your question, is the Earth's orbit safe? The Earth's orbit is changing. It changes in respect to how big of dams we build in some places, and how big of water we're going to hold. Earthquakes, volcanoes, all this environmental phenomena that occurs. I don't know what the line for safe is for our orbit. As we experience significant phase change, so as our ice becomes water, that changes a lot. That's a cascade of so many different things. I spend a great deal of my time talking with people who have a lot of views on different impacts. Will the Gulf Stream change? Will the jet stream change? Our contrails somehow? Will smallpox come out? And there's all of this narrative of what the future is going to look like as our ice shifts. And I don't have a solid answer of what the future looks like, because I think the language we use is wrong. I think we should be talking about our futures, because there's so many different possibilities for what can come out of this, for when this thing is changing and when this thing is not, and how all of those things impact one another. What's the direct answer to your question? How will it impact our planet's orbit? I can't tell you that. And if somebody else in this audience can, go for it. I don't know what that impact will be or what that change will be. Will there be an impact? Yes. There was a question over here.
Thank you so much. I just want to echo the congratulations and the inspiration you've shared with all of us. My question is about the next generation of leaders. And I have the privilege of serving as the director of the Collaborative Water Program here, which is a graduate program reaching students from across the university. And they're in very uncomfortable spaces outside of their disciplines. I've also been witnessing in this current moment with the threats to science and independence that from a mental health perspective, from a variety of perspectives, I'm worried about this particular window of 2 to 3 years of students who are just losing that inspiration and that motivation to go. So the question I have really for you is, what's your advice to those who are really at that vulnerable space of finishing their training, getting ready for the workforce, that maybe they see disappearing in front of them? What kinds of skills, networks, strategies would you recommend to help them become the next generation of leaders?
Thank you for that question. It's a long, long, hard moment that we're in right now, isn't it? Boy, I will not sugarcoat that. And it's a long, hard moment for science. And we sure as heck need leaders, especially leaders somewhat versed in science. We need to increase our rates of science literacy across our populations. And then we need our scientists to step into leadership positions. I hope this is an appropriate answer to your question. But this is what's springing to mind. So I teach a great deal of young people and kindergartners. I love it. It gives me that momentum afterwards. And one of the things that I teach them is, does anyone basically know how to make a glacier? The 3 things you know to make a glacier? You need snow, cold temperatures, and time. Those are the 3 things you need to make a glacier. You need snow to fall, and you need that snow to stack up so that it can transition into glacier ice over time. And so if you think about that at a really basic level, this is what I'm teaching kids all the time, is if you imagine my hand as a snowflake, right? And that snowflake is falling. And as it's falling, it is our world's great library, right? It's falling through our atmosphere, and it's collecting pollen, it's collecting all the shows you're watching, it's collecting all the sediments, everything, the temperatures, et cetera, and it's falling and grasping them. Who knows what 1 snowflake weighs? Not a lot, technical term, okay? Then it falls, then here comes the next snowflake, and the next one, and the next 100 and 1,000 and millions of snowflakes that stack up and get the air squished out of them so they turn into fern, and then they process into glacier ice, right? So you can take that analogy and squeeze it a wee bit. And you can start thinking about glaciers as just these huge piles of snowflakes that are holding hands, trying like hell to keep existing. How do we move through this moment right now? We hold on to each other. It is so easy to pull somebody apart. It's so easy to be a grad student and to point at another graduate student and say that fact is incorrect, and so therefore you are incorrect. We are all in this. And it's a hard time. And that's a time that then requires us to kind of get in touch with our inner glacier and hold one another and move through en masse. Because in my country right now, the person who sticks their head up has got some real repercussions aimed at them. It's a hard time to be a scientist. But holding each other and supporting each other and amplifying each other and changing that model of singular success into a community success, into an us success. This idea that the leader is the person who pops their head up when the leader is actually how all of us network together and hold, is a new model that moves forward. And I've been thinking a lot lately about how that actually looks at a community level and how we move together and support each other as scientists. I don't have a perfect answer for you besides when I'm thinking about graduate students and I'm thinking about what does the career look like and what does the future look like. These are hard times to be moving into an uncertain future. And it impacts the work I do, it impacts all my colleagues' work, it impacts whether people want to go into science or not right now, and pay their bills, and get their business done. And so repeatedly articulating that, repeatedly redefining what it looks like to be a scientist, what success looks like, who gets to do it, how and why, and all of those things, that's open conversations we start from day one as we move forward together. That's what that is. And I hope it works. Thank you.
Em, thank you for sharing how you maintain hope and we need to hold together like the glaciers. As a final note, I want to ask, what is one action that people in today's audience can take to protect glaciers and cold regions?
I always get this question, and I always revisit my early life choices and say, why didn't I study whales? Or palm trees. Palm trees, yeah, redefine what you're doing. If I'd studied palm trees, I'd always be on the beach, and it would have been lovely. If I'd studied whales, there's a metric there. Save the whales. And then we do X action, and then we have X whale, and we have saved them, right? One person is not going to impact glaciers. One country is not going to impact the outcome of glaciers. I wish I'd known this way early on when I was trying to figure out my own metrics for success. Because the only way we save, quote, save being defined as slow, unnatural rates of melt, the only way we get ahead of our ice so that we have a healthy planetary system is to act for a healthy planetary system. If you want to save glaciers, you need to look around and pick the thing that you care about, whether it's your trees, your local parks, your irrigation channels. You need to pick that thing, and then you need to fight like hell for it. We each individually need advocates, and so does our entire environment. And so I can guarantee you that fighting for a healthy forest system, a healthy marsh system, figuring out something new about moss. Sorry, moss is on my brain because I attended a moss thing the other day. Fascinating if you ever want to go down the moss category. But you have to fight for that thing. And you have to keep doing it, and you have to keep talking about it and sharing that information, because that ripple will then impact who you are and how we live together on this planet, which then impacts the ice that is part of our shared planetary system.
Perfect. Great words to end on. I'd like to ask Taylor to come back up for our wrap-up. Thank you, Em.
Thank you, Em, for sharing your insights on your career and the connections between ice and glaciers. We really appreciate you coming to Waterloo to celebrate World Water Day with us, and we have a small token of our appreciation for you.
Woo, woo. Thank you very much, and thank all of you.
This concludes our morning keynote session. Please join us for lunch, which was just out there. Be sure to check out the student research showcase that will be happening during lunch. We ask that the student presenters and the judges get to the lunch table first so that they have time before judging starts at 12:20. And you'll also be receiving an email from me shortly for your opportunity to vote for your favorite poster for the People's Choice Awards. At 2 p.m., we will return for the presentation of the Collaborative Water Program Alumni Award and the afternoon keynote on Imagining a New Way Forward with Silawat Kluche. Thank you.